I'm actually responding to Kevin Lopez's speech in which he claimed that increased interactivity in video games contributes to negative social/psychological behavior in young people. His secondary claims are interactivity reward system is the key component in stimulation of harmful behavior. Certain harmful behaviors have been accounted for, like addiction, violent tendencies, and that young people are more vulnerable to these. My refutation of the claim is kind of an overall trump to his about the negativity of it, and I just said video games have no direct negative effect on young people. One of the main arguments when people are talking about the effect of video games on young people is violence. That's like everyone's go-to response. But according to procon.org, from 1995 to 2008, sales of video games quadrupled in 2008, totaling $11.7 billion in revenue. While in that same amount of time, from 95 to 2008, the arrest rate for violent murders in juveniles fell 71.9%, and the arrest rate for juvenile violent crimes declined 49.3%. Dimitri Williams and Marco Skorich, they're also journalists who wrote a online journal called Internet Fantasy Violence, said that there's no link between violent behavior and violent video games has actually been proven, mostly due to the fact that the tests are flawed. Annotation from their source says many studies suffer from design flaws and use unreliable measures of violence and aggression, such as noise blast tests. There's also a lack of studies that follow children over a long enough period of time. Also refuting the violence, in 2004 there was a U.S. Secret Service review of previous school-based attacks that found that 1/8 of attackers exhibited an interest in violent video games, less than the rate of attackers that showed an interest in violent movies, books, and violence in their own writings. So that kind of covers my violence of it, but then the addiction part, that was kind of tough to refute, as far as the being addicted to playing video games. The thing that I did find while I was trying to refute maybe just the idea of addiction itself was in the Journal of Adolescent Health. It said a 2007 study reported that 45% of young boys played video games because, quote, it helps me get my anger out, unquote. And then 62% played because, quote, it helps me relax, unquote, end quote. Which I found interesting because it was hard to find something that said that they weren't addicted, but I mean, hey, if it helps them relax, that's a start, so that's what I got.
Crack and heroin help me relax.
My buddy told me it was easier to quit smoking cigarettes than heroin.
Oh yeah.
He was wrong.
The study I saw this week was that Oreos are as addictive as cocaine.
It's because they're made out of cocaine. That's why it's so delicious.
I thought, really?
Well, actually, I lick out the frosting and I put cocaine in them.
Someone out there read that and was like, I'm willing to test this. Let's.
You heard of Nick Swartzen?
Yeah.
Yeah, he did the joke. He's like some said it's more difficult to quit heroin.
Then
Yeah. So I took up heroin.
He was wrong. Yeah, same. I don't want to say that one on camera, but yeah.
It's not that big a deal, it's just that you need to find a place to sing. I'm in the middle of fighting a trainer, I can't sing for now.
was gonna say.
I have not been able to read it. I've tried several times to look at the text. I refuse to use walkthrough guides.
Yeah.
I think that's the part I guess. And the problem would be like, if I don't play consistently, I forget what I'm supposed to do. It's been that.
All right, well, structurally started off pretty well. You've got the claim and the secondary claims labeled, so that's pretty easy. It sounds like you're going to go with straight counterclaims on these issues, which is fine. You start off with a general challenge on the relationship between violence and video games, and you go to the general evidence, and I think the general evidence is fine. By the way, just as I'm thinking about it, there are a whole bunch of sources that people go to and cite that are really kind of idea generators or inventories of concepts rather than research sites. Procon.org, for instance, would be one of those. There's there's a debate.com. There's several of them that are like that, and most of what they have there are ideas for how you might respond to arguments. They are not really evidence themselves, so they're not authorities, and quoting them is a little bit problematic. The idea that they have there, I think, is a good one, though, and I think it would probably be better to just get the evidence from the original sources. And I'm just mentioning it to you because it was, it jumped up. It was first procon.org. There are a whole bunch of other people who go to sites like that, and I don't mind that you go to the sites like that, but you need to look at the arguments that they come up with and find backing for them. Don't quote those sources because they generally are not researchers in those fields. They are, like clearinghouses for ideas and information rather than original researchers on that. So it was okay. I mean, because what you did was okay in this context. But I just hear a lot of stuff that I know is people are just mimicking. Well, here's an argument that somebody could make, and it was on Procon. And now what I'll do is I'll quote Procon, making that argument as if it's evidence, and it's not. So you got to be careful about those sorts of things. In this situation, it wasn't quite that way. I like the idea of arguing that there are design flaws in the studies, and that challenges the evidence that the advocate is presenting in a general way, because I don't remember what the advocate's particular evidence was, whether they cited specific studies, and if they didn't, then I think you've got a legitimate right to argue that studies generally have the design flaws. Now, if they have a particular study that they mention, I think you can mention the design flaws here, but I think you also need to talk about the particular study because we don't know that the design flaw criticism applies to this study. It's just one of those things, a general statement that's being made. But the more general the advocate's argument is, I think the more legitimate it is for you to make a general response to it. I did think on the violence issue you had a nice piece of information about the FBI analysis of these mass attackers and their obsessions with a variety of different things, and video games being mentioned only by a very small number of the people in that category, and other things were much more likely to have an effect on them. I thought that was a pretty good argument on the violence issue, which then seems strange because when you get to the addiction issue, the one piece of evidence that you have on this is that people play these games to get out their aggression. I'm going, wait a second. A second ago you're telling me, oh no, it's not really about violence, it's unrelated to that. And that's exactly what people are playing the game for, is to get out their violent aggressions. Now you're telling me a different story, so you got to be a little...
It's to get their violence.
Yeah. I know. You need to make that argument. You need to say it's cathartic, It's so, ideally they release it as opposed to they're influenced by it. And I think that there's a little bit of a contradiction there, but I don't think it's an inexplicable contradiction. I think you've got an explanation, but you'd have to make it. I also got the impression that you're looking for evidence automatically for the counterclaim, which is not a bad thing to do, but don't forget to analyze the evidence that the advocate used on this particular point. I don't remember specifically what information they presented to show that video games are addictive, whether it's the number of hours that people play on average, or whether they tell those stories about the people who played for 49 hours straight and went psychotic. I just don't remember, because I hear these arguments all the time. So I don't remember which evidence was being presented. And that would be one of those things where you could look at their evidence and say, can we really generalize from this? Is this a fair assessment of what most people are like? And I think the more general argument that you could make is that, instead of denying that video games can be addictive, the question is, are they addictive to most people, or is it a problem for most people? And I think there are good arguments that suggest the vast majority of people who play these games do it in a casual way. They continue to lead normal lives. It's not like it absorbs their entire personality. Are there people who do go overboard on it? Of course there are. But there are people who eat too much of a particular kind of food, drink too much of a particular kind of liquor, watch too many particular kind of movies, read too many of a particular kind of comic book. That doesn't necessarily mean that everybody who reads comic books becomes, obsessive compulsive. What is it? Catcher in the Rye is, the book in the backpack of every, fame-seeking serial killer. All those guys that killed, John Lennon or shot Reagan, and you got a lot of those guys, and they all just read Catcher in the Rye. Well, you know what? Millions of people read Catcher in the Rye. A couple of them were psychos. And I think you make the argument more generally. Millions of people play video games. A couple of them are obsessive compulsive, but the vast majority aren't. And I think there's probably good evidence on that. And that's the way maybe you could go on that argument. Okay, thank you.